Oh my gosh.
Eat his hard hat.
Right? We do a mix. We do hard and then we also do once a day wet. Because we're just talking about cats right now because only Haley and I are here right now. And because our previous cat unfortunately died of kidney failure. And one of the things they told us is like wet food's good for that. She would never eat wet food, but he will. So we give him a little bit every day to try to help with that.
Because their hydration, because they don't get that much.
Right.
When they like drink, they only get like. Very.
Yeah, exactly.
So that food is-
And that's what unfortunately got her at the end was she just got so dehydrated. Like it was really kind of sad. They would like pull, yeah, wherever you want. They like pulled up her skin and it would like stay up instead of going back down. And yeah, I was pregnant. It was extra devastating. And that's why we got Simba so quick, is like, we were like, well, we want a friend and we want our kiddo to grow up with a pet, so.
Yeah, that's how I want it to be. When I have a kid, I'm gonna adopt a cat around the same time.
It worked out really well because he's obsessed with her. She is his favorite person in the entire world, which I love.
Oh my.
I know, right? Come on in. There's a whole bunch of people on Zoom, so there are people. We're just talking about cats to see if other people rolled in. Yeah. I know several people have emailed me that they're sick, so I think something's going around. And also, it's a beautiful day. Will not, like judge anybody for that, so. Well, because I wasn't over, because I was talking to Dr. Jackson and I was like, shoot, I have this thing I need to remember to do. So I was frantically emailing in my office. Alrighty. I'm just getting everybody on Zoom here. Yep, cool.
I have a question.
Sure.
I haven't looked at it yet, but the midterm, cause I was gonna do it this weekend, but probably see that I probably should. do it first. But I don't have to like, it's not, cause I know like the take home test that we had last semester. Like. You would already have them printed out for us.
No, yeah, you don't have to print it out. It's just short answers. And then the final is gonna be the same format. So
Okay.
if you do the midterm now, the final will be super easy in a week or so. Alrighty. Hello, everybody. Okay, so we're gonna talk about more about victims today. And I don't know, because we're a little light on folks, maybe we'll get out a little early. We'll just see how far we get. Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and share screen. And just a reminder, we have class Tuesday. So our next class, we have class. But then the following Thursday, so like a week from today, we don't have class because it's the academic symposium, which is what Port Day used to be. That might sound more familiar to people who've been here a couple of years. And so they want us to not have class so that you all can go to those presentations, and some people are presenting. So you have that day to do with as you will.
Isn't this the last year that they did that?
Is it? I haven't heard that.
Because I heard that they were canceling class on that day. People would go, but people just started.
People just aren't
So they're-
That might be the case. It's very unclear. I must say, it's very unclear for professors. Like I forgot to put it in at the beginning of the semester, and luckily one of my students had like gone over the syllabus and was like, what about the academic symposium? And I was, shoot. And I literally had a colleague text me last night, was like, are we supposed to cancel class at the academic symposium? And I was like, I think so. So like, we don't have guidance either. So, all right, hopefully this won't make y'all too sleepy, but you're not even gonna be able to see it if I don't do that, so. But yes, good talks. There are some folks in psychology. Ariana Flutter is gonna present on the 480 project, so go and support folks. It's usually a day I go to like presentations with people I know, and then I kind of like in my office getting work done in between, so.
The environmental symposium is tomorrow.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and the business conference is going on all week. And if you're interested, at noon, there's a speaker who's a veteran with a service dog in Blocker. And then if
They're
it's,
also having, like a girl who's the equivalent to Greta Thunberg.
oh, cool.
Like,
Hey, come on in.
She wrote a book and then Greta Thunberg, like, put it on her page. and
Oh,
stuff,
that's
and
really
like,
cool.
this is good.
I think I'm gonna to the. I never go, but
I went to this year.
yeah,
Yeah.
my is giving us 11 extra credit.
Nice.
We go and
You must have Dr. Sewell.
Yes.
Yeah, she loves the academic symposium because for a while she was in charge of the link. So-
Yeah, and I have a C right now.
Oh, yeah, you need those 30 points.
So,
Get it.
I'm hoping that it's 30 points.
Yeah, and I think probably like early next week, they'll put out the schedules to be able to see who's when, so.
Yeah, she already has the schedule, she already sent it to us.
Oh, nice, oh, good. Because I know they were still trying to get posters as of like 2 days ago, so, but I guess posters is pretty easy, they just like can add them to the bottom of the list. So. Yeah, oh. Yeah,
Are we presenting the service learning project stuff in here?
yes, we're just gonna do it in here on exam day. And it's up to you. A lot of times, because it's such a brief presentation, people have just talked, but if you prefer a PowerPoint, you can do that.
So like next week, the Thursday, I probably won't be here.
That's okay. We were just talking about that's the academic symposium, so we won't be missing class anyway, so. They're supposed to be, but, or maybe not, I don't know. We were just talking about how the professors don't have real good guidance. So. Alrighty, well, we've been having a great uplifting conversation and now we're gonna talk about rapists. Woohoo! One thing I will say, being perfectly transparent, I have never worked with perpetrators. I worked with a lot of survivors of sexual assault. Unfortunately, there's a really high comorbidity between people who have been sexually assaulted and eating disorders, because it gives them a weird relationship with their body.
Are you allowed to choose whether or not you wanna work for?
It depends on your training site. Mine, yes, like there wasn't even like an opportunity to, which was fine. But I know like, so one of our alums, her name is Kasera Diet. Actually, she's Dr. Kasera Diet now, which is awesome. When she went to her PsyD program, like her first semester, she was working with perpetrators. That's where she was assigned. Yeah, so that's just like, as you're researching grad school, look into like how much you can choose your training opportunities. Mine, we were pretty darn good about it. But yeah, so I've never worked with perpetrators. I've had like 1 or 2 clients who themselves were abused, who also abused someone else, right? But mostly I worked with survivors, again, because of eating disorders. Both my folks on more of the anorexic side of things and my folks that I worked with for like bariatric surgery who were overweight, talked about changing their body to be less attractive to their perpetrator through the disordered eating. I also, while I was on my internship at the VA, I worked specifically with survivors of military sexual trauma, which are people, because we had men as well, who have been sexually assaulted by fellow servicemen. So it's not the enemy, it's people who are supposed to be on your side. And unfortunately, a lot of those folks have been assaulted while at work. And so, yeah, I have that perspective. And this is one of the reasons I get so mad about like childhood sexual abuse, because I've seen the ramifications of that down the road and worked with those folks. Like some of my MST people were also abused as kids. Some of my eating disorder clients were abused as kids. I had one eating disorder client who, like, a really creepy guy in like a downtown city came up and flashed her like while she was in the car by herself when she was 8, and like that profoundly affected her. So yeah, this is why I'm like, do not abuse kids. I mean, it seems obvious, but you know, there are places that are trying to make child marriage legal, so you know. Yeah.
Yeah, my niece, kind of like a 70. I don't think anybody, I don't know if anybody else in the family had like noticed or picked up the signs, but I know I always did. She would do, it would just be like stuff that she would do, like she would be called, and she was like 10, like 19 years old, and she didn't have like the best mom. But like my brother, like was her stepfather or whatever, so like my mom would always come back and tell me like if I was ever having in the house and. She was like dealing with stuff like, she would just always be caught like sneaking around on the phone, trying to look up sexual stuff like. And her mom would be like really irrational about it. I don't know if it's just because like I'm a psych major, but
Yeah.
I'm looking at it like, no, something is really wrong. Like, there's a reason why she's so young and she's so like concerned about sex. And she would always, like, her mom would always like kick her out and send her to her grandfather's house and stuff like that. So eventually, like, I kind of started putting two and two together and kind of like every time she would come back, like the stuff that she was doing was just getting worse.
Oh.
So I'm like, does nobody else think that she's being abused by her grandfather?
Right.
Like, I'm not understanding how nobody else is, seeing it, and because of like everything that ended up like going on with her, like she ended up like, committing suicide.
Oh, I'm
A
so
year.
sorry. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and her mom sucks, so she didn't tell us for like 6 months.
Oh, that's even worse.
So my brother wasn't even like able to go to the funeral or anything,
Oh,
like she died like December of 2021 and we
Oh.
didn't find out until like June of last year. But I just always think about that because it kind of sucks because like she was only like 13, 14 when she committed suicide.
Oh,
So it's kind of like she was just under like 8 or 7 years younger than me, so growing up, I didn't really have like a lot of say so in what was going on, but like I kind of always knew like it's something like really wrong, but people don't pay attention, like they just think that a lot of the times it's just like kids acting out, or they're just being bad or being too fast, that's what they like to say about girls, but people don't understand like hypersexuality is a huge like indicator.
Yep.
In a lot of young kids that they're being abused in like home or at school or at daycare, like. It's just
yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that story. And I'm so sorry for your loss. That's so devastating. Yeah. And unfortunately, in a lot of families, people don't want to see if there's something going on. They don't want to admit if there's something going on. And that extends, right? So I know I'm like way behind the times, but I just watched the R. Kelly docuseries that Lifetime did. And like he was abused as a kid and no one like believed him or did anything about it. And then like that turned into him perpetrating against all these women and some men too. And no one did anything about it, right? For years, people knew what was going on, but no one did anything about it. And so there's like this culture of silence around these situations, regardless of its family or like someone famous, right?
I feel like that kind of fame money supports a lot, especially with
Yeah.
minority celebrity, like especially when it's Black celebrity.
Yeah, they talk about that a lot in the docuseries of like,
There
you
were-
don't want to turn on somebody who's like a good representation of your community, right?
It was like mega and stuff.
Yeah.
But there were clear signs, like even the things he would say was like performing and stuff, like I think there's this one video that was like circulating on the internet, he was singing and he was like, if you want to come home with me, all you have to do is be 18. He was like singing like all this stuff, and it was like, and we had like a dude on the stage, but behind him holding up a sign that said 18. There were fireworks going off, and it's just like, and like mothers would like see this and be like, yeah, I want my daughter to go. Like Kelly stuff is, you know, like it's R. Kelly, but yeah, he was pretty fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, just like, yeah, but I mean, a lot of the women he abused, especially early on, were not, like. Yeah, the video of him peeing on the girl, right, like she was 13 and. Unfortunately, video quality kind of got in the way and the girl not wanting to testify, understandably, right? But yeah, so like we've seen that with other famous, powerful people. We think about the Harvey Weinsteins, we think about the Epstein. Can't remember his first name, who cares? He was trash, right? He engaged in human trafficking. Jeffrey Epstein, right? We've seen that with other major celebrities who are serial abusers, right? And no one does or says anything because it's like this culture of protection. Or other people are benefiting from it. Yeah, the interesting thing about the Epstein case is like people will be like, oh, you liberal people, like Bill Clinton might have been one of the people. Do you think that he should be punished? Like literally every person I know is like, yes, if he was engaging in human trafficking, he should be punished, right? But that's like foreign for some people. But yeah, we know that these folks have certain factors. And there are like typologies of people who rape. And again, as I said on Tuesday, most of the people who rape are serial rapists. This is actually why the backlog of rape kits in a lot of places was so upsetting. I don't know how much folks know about this, but I mean, cities, states had thousands, tens of thousands of rape kits just sitting in warehouses that had never been tested. So again, if we think about what we talked about of like how invasive a rape kit is, how much it costs, right, the victim, and then for it to just sit there. So I know in Detroit, where I'm from, when they started testing them, shockingly, they found the same person's DNA in multiple rape kits. So if they had tested it initially, they could have prevented a bunch of rapes, right? And so we look at things like the amount and type of aggression used. So some people are very violent when they rape. Some people largely use coercion, right? It's still rape, but people have a harder time with that. There's this book called Lucky. It's by Alice Sebold, the woman who wrote The Lovely Bones. And she describes her own sexual assault. And she was like the rare stranger in the bushes with a knife. But because he dropped the knife at some point during it, even her dad was like, well, couldn't you have gotten away then? It's what? Like, we have a real tendency to blame the victim, right? And when the level of aggression is high, whether it's heightened in sexual arousal, or in a sadistic manner, right? Again, having watched this docuseries, it seemed like, unfortunately for R. Kelly, this was part of his thing. Like, he included physical abuse as part of his sexual acts. Whether the offender showed evidence of psychopathy or antisocial PD, you know, just like we have serial killers, some of our serial rapists are psychopaths. They don't care how much they hurt other people. And whether the offender relied on deviant sexual fantasies to reduce sexual arousal. So as I mentioned on Tuesday, most of the sexual assaults that we see, over 3/4, are committed by someone you know. And they call this the acquaintance rape or date rape. And this is what women are least likely to report, or whoever the victims are, because you know the person, and sometimes like you don't even know, like something I was looking at yesterday said that, like, when rape crisis line get calls, the very first question the vast majority of people ask them is, this has happened to me, was I raped? Because people don't know if it's someone you know and they coerced you, right? Like, is that rape, or is it because I know them? It's not, right? So they don't report it. In one survey, 22% of college women reported becoming a victim at least once of either an attempted or completed acquaintance rape. And these can happen anytime, anywhere. When I was in college, we had a very strong Take Back the Night program. And if you're not familiar with this, it's usually a march and then a chance for survivors to tell their stories. And my senior year, literally every other person who got up to the microphone was like someone I was close with, who, like, I hadn't even heard their stories before that. So it can be really hard. And one of my good friends was just like in her room studying with someone she thought was a guy friend, wearing like flannel PJ pants, and she was sexually assaulted then, right? But the most common times it happens is on weekends between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. And it's often at the assailant's home, whether that's an apartment, a dorm room, what have you. And acquaintance rapes tend to involve situations in which both the attacker and the victim have been using alcohol or drugs, but they're less likely to involve the use of weapons. Typically, instead, we see verbal threats and maybe using physical prowess to overpower the victim. And some of the stuff that we were just talking about, right? Like with Sydney's niece, victims of sexual assault are 3 times as likely to suffer from depression, 6 times more likely to suffer from PTSD, 13 times more likely to abuse alcohol, 26 times more likely to abuse drugs, and 4 times more likely to contemplate death by suicide. The long-term consequences of rape are also really concerning. Fear and anxiety have been found to be significantly higher in the rape victim population, regardless of the length of the time since their rape. And we know that anxiety is related to heightened levels of cortisol in our system, which is related to stress. And we know how bad stress is for the body physically, right? And as well as emotionally. And then rape victims who were significantly more depressed than those who had not been raped, and fear, anxiety, and depression are highest in those who had been sexually assaulted more than once. Some other stats, about 40% of rape survivors develop STDs as a result of the assault. 80% of victims suffer chronic physical or psychological problems over time. And then obviously it's also going to affect your college performance if you're a student, right? So oftentimes they can't perform at the same academic levels. They may be unable to carry a full course load, particularly if, and like this is with missing classes as well, particularly if their assailant is like in their class, right? Like you're not going to that class probably. One of the good things here that I know that they can do is that if you've been assaulted and you are in a class with your assailant, and there's another section of the class, they can just move you to the other section of the class. Like there's no like need for paperwork and whatnot. Some of them withdraw from courses altogether. They might leave the school until they recover or transfer. And it can also be the victim's friends. So when we do the activity, which we might not get to until Tuesday, one of the things you'll look at is a sexual assault case we had at Wesleyan back around 2012. And in that case, not only did the victim leave, but also her best friend did, because she was sick of hearing her best friend slut shamed.
Low key, my filmmaking group, doing an advanced filmmaking class, we're making a movie about sexual assault, and then we have to talk to like the dean and stuff about it because of that.
Oh, interesting.
And they were like, yeah, don't wear any like college version stuff. Like, I feel like the school's kind of weird though.
They kind of have to be, I think, because of the lawsuit.
Oh, no, they are.
Yeah.
They, I came to them about an incident that happened to me off campus, my sophomore year in 2021. And they basically told me that, like, basically they just told me to go to the police
Because it was off there.
because it was off campus, but it was like, I came to them on campus because, like, this is where I felt like I'm safe the most. And they have like a whole like Title IX.
Right.
So I kind of felt like,
Yeah.
if anybody would have cared, it would have been you guys.
You remember our Title IX policy yesterday in my class, and it said if it's on campus or off campus, our school's supposed to take care of it.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
they told me specifically, like, that there was nothing that they could do about it, like, they just told me to go as quickly as possible. So I ended up like just taking a week off classes, because it was too like hard for me to like actually sit in class.
Oh, of course it was.
But like, that was like the only thing that like, and I was able to get help through like my English professor at the time.
Good.
But like, that was the only like help that I got, like, nobody like checked up on me or anything, they just told me to take me to the police, like, that's all.
One of the things I'll tell y'all and tell folks on Zoom too is like, if you are assaulted, you can go to the counselors, the Sahara people, or the minister, and they only have to report that an incident happened. They don't have to, like report anything else. So if you just want to like talk to someone and see what your options are, those are good folks to talk to. Yeah, right. And I'm so sorry that happened to you and that they treated you like shit. That's unacceptable.
My mom for Title IX, so my freshman year, they basketball, I got that crazy injury. Yeah.
I still like, I de-identify, but I still tell your story when people are like, well, our students are all fine now. And I'm like, let me tell you the story of something random that happened to one of my students. That's injured in both legs.
But yeah,
Oh.
so I got injured, but before that, we had like our Title IX meeting, like before practice, kind of stuff. And it was just kind of weird, because like, I don't know who the faculty were that were like giving the points and stuff, but like, they were like, yeah, you guys have to be careful because your targets on campus, because you should basketball, this and that. I was like, this doesn't seem like the way that you should like convey this message, but it was just like, it was crazy the way they were like talking about it. They're like, you gotta watch out because sometimes girls will like do this and then regret it after. And I was like, man, like, I feel like, and I couldn't say anything. 'Cause I was a freshman. I was like,
Right.
but it was just weird. And I
Yeah,
feel like
that's never.
pretty, I feel like that's pretty corollary like across the nation with like, especially at like bigger programs like Division I and stuff, like, they all have to have these Title IX.
Yeah.
When you're bringing in that much money to a school, I doubt that they are gonna try and like, I don't know, hold you that accountable for things that happen so often. But it's just.
Yeah. There's a documentary, it's really hard to watch, but it's called The Hunting Ground, and it's about sexual assault on college campuses. And they interview a like, I think campus police, I don't even think they have security, I think they have campus police at Notre Dame in Indiana. And there was a woman who reported an assault and he was investigating it, he was doing what he was supposed to do. They would not let him talk to the assailant because he was a football player.
Yeah.
Like they just denied him access.
It's crazy though.
Yeah,
Yeah, like even in like, I don't know if it's just, if it's in Virginia or if it's just in Chesapeake. Cause I even ended up going off campus with police. And they basically told me that they couldn't treat it like a rape case because I wasn't screaming in campus.
Right.
So in order.
Which is
for you to
absurd.
Even, in order for you like in Virginia to even get the case taken to court, like you have to be acting as if you're like in a movie.
right.
Like, and you're kicking and screaming and shouting like that's what they
It's
want.
so inaccurate for how most victims act, because so people think of fear response as fight or flight.
Yeah.
But there's this third one, which is freeze.
Yeah.
It's like deer in headlights, and that's what happens to most people when they're sexually assaulted. Because you just don't know what to do, your mind is like, whoa, and you're afraid. If I move or say something horrible will happen.
Like, I know for me, like I'm like 5 foot.
Mhm.
Like for you to be like almost a whole foot taller than
Right,
me
right.
and stronger than me, like for me, like I don't want to do anything because I'm scared that if I do anything, that I'm not gonna make it out alive.
Right.
So it's just like when they said it, like the lady that I was talking to, she felt so bad because it wasn't really her that was making the decision, it was just the law.
Mhm.
So she felt so bad, but I was just kind of like, it's just really crazy, like.
Yeah.
Most of the time, that's not even really how it happens anyway for a lot of people.
Yeah, we used to have, and I don't want to like knock any of our current Title IX coordinators because I haven't interacted with them much, but McCarran Caputa a while ago was the head of Res Life, and she was one of the deputy Title IX folks, and she was really good. Like she would give really good presentation and like would address things right away and like make sure that everything went through. And then I think like some of it's unfortunately just been kind of watered down, and the Trump administration did part of that too. Because they changed how the Department of Ed was handling these things, and now like Biden's trying to change it back. Because this was his thing when he was VP, this was like what he pushed for, so I don't know what his, Biden actually. Yeah, and I don't know what his history is, if he's just like known women who have been through this, or it's just a passion issue for him. But yeah, I'm actually a rotating faculty member who sits on the Title IX hearing board. I haven't sat on a case in like 3-4 years, so I don't know if people are just not reporting or if people are getting kind of sent away like for you. But it's weird to me that I haven't sat on one, because when McCarran was here, people thought it looked bad. They're like, oh, it's bad that we have so many people reporting. And I was like, no, it's good, because we know that about 20% of women are sexually assaulted, also a percentage of men. And it means that people feel comfortable coming forward, right, to reports. At places like UVA, where they're reporting 0 sexual assaults a year. That's not true. It's just no one feels comfortable reporting. So yeah, it's maybe it's something that this summer I'll try to like touch base with people and see how they're doing and see how I can help. What's that? There it is, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so Jane Doe, the person in the case that you guys will read about when we do the activity, she left, and then her best friend also left because so many people were like slut shaming Jane Doe all the time. So That was just horribly handled. Just to give you guys like a nutshell, you'll get the article on Tuesday. But they did everything right. They went through the whole Title IX process and did everything right, expelled the guy. And then our dean of students at the time was like, I'm gonna let this guy just voluntarily withdraw because we don't want to ruin this young man's life. We want him to be able to go and play his sport at another college.
Another person.
Yeah, exactly. And his letter, like at the end, said something like, I hope you can get over this or something to the victim. And so that's why she sued. I mean, understandably. And I think I mentioned previously, just her lawyer handled it horribly and she ended up losing the lawsuit even with an all-female jury.
I
So,
don't understand how that stuff like ends up happening, like, I don't know, where I'm from, like, it's similar, and like, there was this one dude, he was a white dude, who was good at lacrosse or something, and he like, had like serial rape allegations, and like, I knew some of the girls that he had like, did it to, and then I would ask them, I was like, why, like, what's going on, like, how do you feel about the situation? They're like, I've just known him since I was like a little kid, and
Right.
like, yeah, like, I don't know, it's just like, he's done a lot of stuff, but like, and then he ended up getting arrested. And then had to go to trial and he got off and ended up going to Stanford University and
wow.
like played across there, and then there's somebody else that got convicted again, and now he wants to go to trial again. It's just like, but yeah, like, I don't know, that stuff happens a lot, at least where I'm from.
Yeah.
With white people.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. It's people who have privilege and then people who create privilege for other people, right? So like, you know, I don't remember if the football player was black or white at Notre Dame, but like Notre Dame football is big business. I actually grew up for part of my life in South Bend, Indiana, and like that's a thing there, right? Like many other D1 schools, right? So yeah, if you're making money for someone, they're gonna try to cover it up. And that's again part of what happened with R. Kelly and some of these other celebrities. Oh, this is some of the stuff I was saying. 13 times many people attempt suicide, and then rape survivors are 6 times more likely to attempt suicide than victims even of other crimes. And 1/4 to 1/2 seek mental health treatment. I would say probably all of them should, but most of them don't feel comfortable doing it, right? So how has this been handled legislatively? How has this been handled in the courts? So beginning in the 70s, legislation about rape began to undergo review and revision. So for example, replacing the term rape with the term sexual assault, reflecting the view that this crime primarily involves an expression of violence, that it's not about sex, it's about power, just like any other physical assault. And the basic definition for sexual assault is non-consenting sexual contact. So it can be intercourse, but it can be other things that's obtained either by force or by coercion against the victim. Until about the 1980s, 4/5 of states still use the resistance standard, and apparently in Virginia, they're still using that, which makes me really mad. Now most states include coercion or intimidation by the alleged assailant in their definition. Many newer laws divide sexual assault into degrees, just like murder. And it's so sad this has to be up there. But prior to the 1980s, spousal rape was not recognized as a crime, and I think federally it was still not recognized as a crime until the 90s. So if you raped your spouse, that was considered not a crime because you're married. So of course, just you consent by just being married. That thankfully changed. And we talked about Title IX and how it's been implemented, and essentially the idea is you can't have equal access to education if you are not able to go to class and not able to stay at the school because of being sexually assaulted or harassed. So in terms of people testifying in cases against their accusers, jurors can be influenced by testimony, but they can also be influenced by testimony about the woman's character, her reputation and lifestyle. And this used to be really common for the defense to do, would be to just try to tear the woman down, say the woman's a slut. And so all states now have what are called rape shield laws. And these are designed to protect victims' rights to privacy during trial and exclude evidence about past sexual behavior that might influence the jury's decision in the case, because it doesn't matter, right? Sex workers are sexually assaulted. It doesn't mean they weren't sexually assaulted just because they're a sex worker. There's something else I wanted to say about this. Oh. However, this is in criminal cases. So for example, in the Jane Doe case, part of what she was seeking damages for was that she had been a virgin at the time she was raped, and then she also said that she wasn't able to engage in a healthy sex life afterwards, which is pretty typical, unfortunately, for people who've been sexually assaulted. Because she said that as part of claiming damages, it's like if you said I got whiplash in a car accident, they then have to provide evidence about that. So like, they have to interview all of her sex partners or non-sex partners, and then so like Huffington Post wrote about our case about that, and they're like, what about rape shield laws? And like, obviously, I don't think we should do this, but again, her lawyer handled it so badly, and if you're claiming that, you open your client up to having to prove that, right? Just like you wouldn't accept whiplash in a case without getting an x-ray, right? Or having some sort of doctor's note. So again, her lawyer was awful.
I definitely understand why a lot of people don't want to go to court for it.
Yeah, it's just awful, right? It's
Nobody
re-traumatizing.
And nobody wants to really sit there and. Because I never actually had to go to court, but like I had a friend like that wanted to really sit and like. Talk to me about it, because like the person that did it to me was like their friend, so they wanted me to like. Go in detail about like everything that happened, like just to make sure that their friend really did this, and it's just like. Nobody wants to really sit there and. Talk about the thing that just happened, like why.
Well, and like typically, if you go to court, although in some cases they've made exceptions, but typically your accuser is sitting right in front of you while you tell your story. Right, so that's really intimidating for people, especially for children who are like child sexual abuse survivors. They do have, like, they'll put a screen up, or sometimes they'll have them in another room. They used to here, I don't know if they still do, but allow the victim to be like on an iPad on like Skype or Zoom or something, so they didn't have to be in the room with the alleged perpetrator, right? But yeah, it's really hard. Because you have to tell your story over and over and over.
In this episode, well, I think I was watching a long time ago, and they were trying to figure out like what this little girl's problem was, because I think it was like she wouldn't talk to nobody or whatever, so they kept trying to get her to like talk to like the detectives and stuff, but she wouldn't talk to anybody. So it was a female detective, but they ended up having a man. Like, I think it was just like I think it was actually like a forensic psychologist. She ended up deciding to bring a man in the room, and she had the man go sit in front of the little girl. And when the man went and sat in front of the little girl opened up her legs. Like, she just sat there and opened up her legs. So I forget what it was that was going on in the house that made her feel like that was a possibility that it was happening, but that's what led up to her wanting to do that, to see if she was gonna react. And when the little girl just opened up her legs, and like helped her, like, yeah, like she's being abused at home.
Right.
So.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, yeah. There are definitely cases. Actually, it's really interesting. My daughter, you know, we find little rabbit holes on YouTube, and there's this like PBS station that does little like field trips, and they record them and post them so kids learn. And they did one where they went to the police station and they were talking about the various police dogs. But one of the dogs they had was actually a therapy dog. And the detective was specifically saying, we take this dog when we're going to interview children who've been through horrible things, because it helps the kids like calm down and they open up. So yeah, they're trying to find different techniques and ways to do that, to, you know, get the information they need, but make the kid as comfortable as possible, as you could be, right? Like really hard. And there's actually, I think I might have mentioned this when we talked about eyewitness testimony. Some courts even allow therapy dogs while the kid is testifying, which is really cool. So the next couple slides are actually from a talk I gave about so we used to have a common read for first year experience when first year experience was a thing. And 1 year our common read that all the first years read was Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, highly recommend. And one of the things she talks about is she was sexually assaulted. She was actually gang raped as a young girl. And so they asked me to talk about sort of the psychological parts of survivorship and what happens to you. And so these are slides I use to talk about what goes on in the brain in particular. And you'll see a lot of the citations on these slides are from Campbell. And this is Rebecca Campbell, who does a lot of really good research about the neuropsychological effects of sexual assault. And so these are things you'll hear from law enforcement officials, other people who interact with survivors, and they'll say, the stuff they say makes no sense. I see them hedge, they're making it up as they go along. They lie all the time. I can tell. No way it's true. No one would act like that if it's true, or they can't get their story straight. And there are actually like neurobiological reasons for that. And gosh, this yellow one does not show up at all up there. So this is the amygdala detects a threat, and then that activates the hypothalamus in the brain. And there's this axis in the brain called the HPA axis that has to really do with anxiety and fear and things along those lines. And that like releases this flood of hormones like cortisol throughout your body. And what happens as a result of that is your catecholamines increase, and that damages your memory and impairs your ability to think rationally in the moment. Your opioids increase, that's your body trying to protect you. And that gives you flat affect. Like if people go to report their sexual assaults, a lot of times they'll just kind of talk about it in a monotone. And people think they should be like screaming or crying, but it's actually like, again, your brain trying to protect you by numbing you. And then the corticosteroids decrease, which reduces your available energy and can actually impair your immune functioning, which is why, unfortunately, if someone has an STD who's the assailant, you're even more likely to contract the STD as a result of a sexual trauma. And so when you have your increased stress hormones go up, this yellow one says impaired functioning in the hippocampus. The hippocampus has to do with memory. Your memories are fragmented. And then memory activation can be unpredictable and traumatic in and of itself. And the events of the assault typically can be recalled accurately, but the best description, and Rebecca Campbell wrote this, of what it's like for a sexual trauma survivor to tell their story is like, if you tried to write the story out or took notes during a lecture on Post-it notes that had lost their stick, and then you stood up at the end of the lecture and they're just like all over the ground, and someone said, tell me your story in order. All right, so that's what their memory feels like. And if there's drugs or alcohol in the system during the assault, that can prevent encoding. So that means they never made the memory in the first place, so you can't retrieve it. Obviously, if you've been roofied, right, and you're blacked out or you're blacked out drunk, you're just not making a memory of it at all. I had a client, eating disorder client, who just woke up in someone else's dorm room with rug burns on her back, and that's how she knew she'd been assaulted. So it makes it difficult to make memories. So their story can seem fragmented or sketchy. And then law enforcement can misinterpret this as like, oh, they're being evasive or they're lying, but they're really trying hard to remember. Again, they're just picking up those stickless Post-its. And because of the experiences, their emotions or behaviors may not be what we quote unquote expect from a victim. Again, there might be numbness or detachment, this flat affect. Another thing is that, you know, as victims start to come to terms with things, some will want to not talk about it anymore. Some will will have righteous anger and want to pursue it. And they draw a lot of strength from that. So this is, again, like the R. Kelly docuseries was actually like 3 seasons. And in the 3rd season, the like statement they put from R. Kelly's lawyer on the screen was like, these victims are not acting like victims because they're talking out. And it's like, wow. So if anyone talks out about what happened to them, then it didn't actually happen, right? Like we try to undermine these people. And again, as long as there was no interference from substances, the memory is accurate. It just takes longer than expected to put it together in a way that other people can understand it. So how do we prevent sexual assault? The biggest thing that people always do is put it back on the victims, right? If we give people self-defense training and we educate them about sexual assault, then it won't happen. And like, sure, this might help, right? But I personally find this very problematic because we're teaching people how not to get raped instead of teaching people how not to rape, right? And again, putting it back on the potential victims. There's also effective treatments for rapists so they don't repeat it again, because these folks do tend to be repeat offenders, then we can prevent future rapes. And one of the ways they've used in the past is chemical castration. There are medications you can give people that basically makes it so they cannot get sexually turned on. That doesn't mean they can't do other things though, right? And I have no sympathy for rapists. I want to like really put that out there, but I don't know how comfortable I am with this because this has been used punitively for people in the past who were sexual deviants in other ways. So I don't know if anyone saw the movie The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch. So he was playing a real life guy who developed the computers that decoded Nazi code in World War II. Brilliant guy, you know, helped us win the war. He was British, and because he was gay, they chemically castrated him. Like that was their thanks for helping your country. And he also died by suicide, right? So like, I think we can do other things. I think we can work on like good CPT, and if we can't heal them, then you know, probably our punishments for rape should be longer and people should be put away for longer, right? Oh, and I don't have. Gosh, I'll have to try to find it here real quick. I have this great graphic that I usually put in here. There's this great image about how not to rape someone. I'm not gonna be able to find the like catchy one, but I'm guessing these all have similar things, but it's like, carry a rape whistle with you. If you find out you're about to rape someone, blow the whistle until someone comes to stop you. Like rape whistles are a thing that I don't have it on this keychain, but my other keychain that has like the keys I don't use that much, I still have a rape whistle on it that I was given in college. Most people go to the laundry room to do their laundry. Do not attempt to molest someone who's in the laundry room. Use the buddy system. If it's inconvenient for you to stop yourself from raping women, ask a trusted friend to accompany you at all times, right? Just the idea that, you know, we are telling potential victims the opposite of all these things, right? Yeah, watch your drinks for drugs. Well, why don't we just tell people not to put drugs in their drinks? Right. And again, this is gendered just because women are sexually assaulted more often, but you certainly could apply this to anybody that we're trying to avoid it. Right. Don't creep into someone's home. Right. I mean, again, it sounds stupid, but these are the things we tell people, like make sure all your doors are locked. If you go to a party, use a buddy system and look out for. And again, with our current environment, that's not a bad thing to do. But certainly, gosh, don't we wish we lived in a world where like that wasn't the way we try to fix this, right? So I like whenever I hear something like we developed a nail polish that women can dip in their drink to make sure it's not drugged, I'm like, that's great, but how much of that time and effort could have just spent on like developing a curriculum that teaches people to respect each other's bodily integrity, right? And again, I think that's something that we could easily teach everybody. Like, I don't know about y'all, but like my sex ed didn't talk about consent, right? In the way that like would be helpful. And I had very comprehensive sex ed, actually. So, you know, let's talk about it. Let's do that. But people are uncomfortable talking about that. Like I went to a Title IX training and people are always, well, talking about consent is awkward, but you gotta, and I was just like, like consent could be sexy, right? Like you can make it part of the intimate process. And it was so funny because the people teaching it would like refer back to my comment, like consent can be good, but they never use the word sexy. And I'm like, how are you talking about sex and not able to like talk about the potential enjoyment of it? Right? It's really interesting to think about how weird American ideas about sex are. All right, so now we're going to start talking about domestic violence. And in the past, and really even today, still, we often talk about this in terms of battered spouses. Again, not a huge fan of this language because it puts it on the person who's being abused as if there's something wrong with them. They're the battered spouse, right? So about 33% of men and 25% of women have been involved in some sort of physically aggressive altercation in their life. So this could be like a schoolyard fight, right, or something like that. Although in relationships, female to male aggression is as frequent as male to female aggression, what we see is that male aggression is significantly more likely to result in serious injury. So there are, in fact, cases where the couple is mutually abusive to each other, the heterosexual couple, but if the man is being physically aggressive, the woman is much more likely to be harmed, if that makes sense. About 30% of all the women murdered in the US each year are killed by their male partners. And in fact, they are most likely to be killed when they try to leave. So whenever people are like, why didn't she leave? Blah, 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 blah. Because she would have been killed, right? Potentially. A lot of times there are other things too, like threats against their children, threats against their pets, things along those lines. There are a lot of reasons to stay there. Sometimes there's economic abuse as well, financial abuse, where they don't let the victim get a job. So how are they going to leave? How are they going to live? Right? Things along those lines. So some myths here about battered spouses. There used to be these ideas that battered women must like this, that it's, they're masochists and that they provoke these assaults inflicted on them and they get what they deserve. Again, very similar language to what we hear for some of this other stuff, right? And so, we see and hear things about, again, victim blaming. Why did they leave? Why didn't they stand up to him? Blah, 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 blah. Well, it's really hard to do those things. They are free to leave these violent relationships anytime they want to, largely no. And that men who are nonviolent in their dealings with outsiders behave the same way in their dealings with their intimates. No. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the next one, which is that middle and upper class, like this is just a lower class problem. Actually, I think it might have been the second or third episode of Detroit 187 that we watched the pilot of. There actually is a case, I like that they show it, where it's a very rich man and he's abusing his wife, right? And people are like, wait, that happens? Yeah, right? And again, people think it's like lower class, ethnic minority, and it's part of their culture, like part of whose culture, right? And that good battered women are passive and never try to defend themselves. But the last one is really interesting, right? Because we're saying women should leave, but like how you gonna get out of there if you're passive? And then also women who try to leave are more likely to be killed, and women who do kill their spouses in order to be away end up on death row. Like there's no like excusing them for doing that. When they try to argue self-defense, people will be like, well, was he actively attacking you in the moment? Like, no, but they created a culture of fear within the home. There's also emotional abuse and verbal abuse, obviously, that go along with this. To oftentimes either they're being told they don't have other support, or sometimes the abuser has cut them off from all other support. There's a great activity I do with my GWSF 219 that Dr. Stoley lends to me, where you have someone portray the survivor, and then everyone else gets a role, whether it's like the parents, the friends, the ER, a battered women's shelter, and the victim just asks everybody, will you help me? And then everybody has a script like, sorry, the shelter's full, or your parents are like, oh, he seems like such a nice man and he's rich, or things like that. And you cut the strings. And so finally, the only connection is between the victim and the abuser, right? And that is on purpose. So what causes battery? Not the victims, just like the victims don't cause sexual assaults, but batterers are more likely than non-batterers to be unemployed, less well educated. They are more likely to be members of minority groups and low SES. But again, I think a lot of that is because we don't report the higher classes and the white people who are doing this as much. A lot of them, very similar to sexual assault perpetrators, have themselves been abused as children, or maybe saw an abusive relationship between their parents. We had a criminologist here for a while that she did really interesting research on this phenomenon, on like how batterers grow up, people who were abused as kids or just watched abuse within the household, that influences them quite a bit as adults. They typically have poor self-concepts. They don't think really well of themselves. So they might be using physical aggression to kind of compensate. They are not very good problem solvers, and they often have limited verbal skills. So they're able to talk, but they're not able to like resolve conflicts through talking. They're prone to extreme jealousy. So they monitor their partner's activities closely and exert excessive control over their partner's whereabouts. We used to, when that criminologist, Dr. Morgansky, was here, we used to do the red flag campaign every fall, which is about like looking for red flags for domestic violence. And, you know, some of them are like them wanting to know where you are every second of every day, them saying like, you know, you can't go hang out with your friends, things along those lines. Again, they're trying to control, they're trying to make your world smaller so you don't have support and you're dependent on them, you can't leave them. There are, from this Waltz et al. Study, they talked about 3 distinct types of batterers. So there are people who are just generally violent. There are people who act out in any situation, physically violently, or maybe verbally violently. There are some people where it's psychopathological, they might just be psychopaths, right? And then there are some people, and this is probably the vast majority, who only abuse their family. And so again, very similar to sexual assault assailants, people will be like, oh, they're such a good person. Of course, they're not doing that at home, right? When they're like putting on a different face. And these groups were distinguished by the degree of violence within the relationship and the degree of general violence reported, as well as by personality characteristics. There's also some evidence as many 40% of batterers have borderline personality disorder. So this is a severe personality disorder. It's characterized by unstable moods, behaviors, and a really bad sense of self. So people with borderline PD often sort of like cling to other people as part of their identity. And so that's what batterers do. And so then their victim becomes so important to them that they don't want to let them out of their life. All right, so one of the things I studied when I had to do a big paper for my grad class about this is I looked into battered woman syndrome. And this is a like pseudo diagnosis that's never been in like the DSM or anything, but that was created back in the 60s and 70s to essentially try to explain why women in particular who've been abused acts the way they do. And it was created, I think, with very good intentions, but you'll see as we go through, it relies heavily on problematic stereotypes. And so to sort of keep that in mind. So about 1.3 million are beaten by their significant others every year in the US. And about a quarter of women will be abused at some point in their lives while in a relationship. But this is probably inaccurate and an underestimate due to underreporting, right? Like, yeah, this is probably worse than sexual assault in terms of like people just don't report it. And I know like in Virginia Beach, my friend that's a Virginia Beach police officer, this has changed since, but he used to say like, if they went to a home and they asked the victim to press charges, they've got to say they're gonna press charges with the abuser right there, right? And so most of them don't, but now the police can press charges for them.
You know how they say that, like most of the time, like when it comes to people that you're dating or anything, like. Most of the time, they show you like their red flags from the beginning, and we just ignore them.
Right.
Like, that is one main thing when it comes to men that I always like pay attention to. When I first started talking to them, it's just like, when it comes to like the traits that like an abuser has, like specifically like domestic abuse. Because I would like to live,
Right,
so
right.
that is the one thing I promise to God, I could never deal with, like, I promise you, like.
I tell Kyle all the time, if he ever touches me, he better just kill me, because if not,
No,
it's all like that.
seriously, I used to like, I was like dealing with this boy and he never hit me, like, I never even would have let him come close. But he would just become like very irrational and he'd be like, oh, like, I hate you and I love you and I hate you and I love you and I hate, like, it just is very back and forth, but it would give me the vibes that if I dealt with you long enough, like, you aren't gonna hit me, so like, let me leave you alone because I like your life. I don't want you to die, because I just feel like that's a deficit, like, I just.
Yeah, that's such a good point, and it's really interesting, again, I obviously can't diagnose someone I haven't interviewed and whatnot, but like. That hate you, I love you, hate you, that is a characteristic of people with borderline PD, that like one day they'll put you on a pedestal, the next day you're the worst person in the world. And that's true not only of your partner, but of like your therapist, so that's fun when you're treating them. Cause like one day they're like, you're a miracle worker, and the next they're like really pissed at you and like don't want to engage, so. And then you just have to recognize it's part of their pathology, right, when you're being a therapist, but it doesn't mean that like. You should have to put up with it in a relationship in any way. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so in addition to like characteristics of batterers, I've looked at like victims. A lot of them have low self-esteem and they blame themselves for abuse and they feel guilty for it. About a quarter of them were physically abused as kids, and almost half of them saw their mothers abused. People who are perpetrators, and not all, but a lot of them, whether they're sexually assaulting or physically assaulting people, they look for people who are vulnerable, right? And in this case, these people are vulnerable. In terms of MMPI, their profiles can look like people with schizophrenia, and they'll score really high on the old scale 4, which has to do with family discord. They'll suffer from depression and PTSD, understandably. And abuse is psychological and sexual as well as physical. Again, as I mentioned, threats to their kids, threats to other people, threats to their pets. And they come from all walks of life. And, you know, again, not surprisingly, they're not all masochistic and passive. This can happen to very strong individuals, again, men, women. And I think, again, like, sometimes it's harder even for men who are abused to admit it or talk about it, because people are like, what do you mean that you were abused by a woman, another guy, right? Things along those lines. And so that can be really difficult. So we'll stop there for today. So thank you for the 3 of you for being here in person, and all 3 of you for like participating a lot. That was a great conversation. And thanks to everyone who was able to be on Zoom. And we'll pick up with this on Tuesday and probably get to our activity then. So if you're able to be in class on Tuesday, awesome. If not, we can do Zoom groups. If I don't see y'all, have a great weekend.